If you want to know how many Kororā live in New Zealand, go find them. We need to avoid being the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but put the fence up at the top of the cliff before it gets too bad. And they fade away like some other species are doing right now.
The first thing we need to do is respect their space. So if we can respect penguins and their right to exist and their right to live, then that's the first step in terms of making sure that their populations are going to thrive.
Hello, kia ora. I'm Anna.
And I'm Callum from Conservation Amplified.
And you're listening to the People Helping Nature podcast.
Our mission is to make conservation mainstream, one topic at a time.
Today we are so excited to be joined by Melissa and Hiltrun from the New Zealand Penguin Initiative, or NZPI, to talk about all things penguins and in particular Kororā. Welcome.
Thanks, Callum.
Thank you.
I'm super excited as well to have you here today. I'm fortunate to work with Kororā and NZPI wearing one of my many different other hats in the conservation world. And I'm glad that we're chatting today and sharing the amazing work that you're up to.
So, to kick off, would you like to start by introducing yourself and your roles at NZPI?
Yeah, hi, and thank you for having us. I'm Hiltrun, and I'm the Program Director for the New Zealand Penguin Initiative. From a profession point of view, I'm a scientist, a penguin scientist, and I've been with NZPI since 2021. And my role is to support the community groups that are signed up with NZPI and provide them with information, analyze some of the data and create resources for their use, and also do a bit of science, the scat DNA and population numbers and trends. And so that's my role.
Great to be here, Callum and Anna. I'm the Community Program Manager. That basically means I talk with groups around the country that are undertaking penguin conservation, and I find ways of how we can support them to manage their local kororā colonies. That may look like visiting sites and providing training on how to do monitoring and how they could protect their habitats, education and advocacy for the local communities and getting other people engaged, and also coordinating the national monitoring program, so piecing it all together. We do that by having a standardised way of collecting data, and that all feeds into our national database, and that's where Hiltrun comes in and looks at everything from at a scientific level. Then we can use that to inform our actions nationwide to protect penguins.
Amazing. I think for me the key word here is nationwide and bringing it all together. That sounds fantastic. So to put some more context around this for our audience, when and why was NZPI, or the New Zealand Penguin Initiative, founded?
So NZPI was founded in 2019, and the problem that was identified was that the Kororā, or little penguins, apparently seemed to be declining. That was mostly anecdotally, so people were just saying, but there wasn't any hard data. There was no collection point that was collecting together all the information that is available for Kororā nationwide. So there were lots of data that ended up in notebooks and on people's Excel sheets on their computers, but it wouldn't go any further. So we have really no idea what the state of the species is nationwide. Are the numbers going up? Are they going down? Are they disappearing in some places? Are they doing well in other places? What are their threats? If they're disappearing or declining, what is causing that? So we have identified almost 60 groups that are working in some capacity with Kororā throughout New Zealand, but there was no real collaboration between them. They were not talking that much to each other or sharing data. There was also a need for the support of those groups, because often they were uncertain on how to go about doing Kororā work, and also learning from each other. NZPI has stepped into that role to have an access point for the groups to talk to somebody like us, but also to talk amongst themselves and exchange ideas and share trouble, how they're dealing with that. So it's an umbrella organization that is supporting people who are passionate about Kororā throughout New Zealand.
Thank you for sharing that overview. It's really good to see the gap that you're filling in the overall penguin conservation space. Can you please give us a brief overview of little penguins or kororā for listeners who aren't too familiar with this amazing species?
So Kororā is the little penguin. People will know it as the blue penguin or the little blue penguin. It also is the name for the white-flippered penguin that lives predominantly on Banks Peninsula. That's here in New Zealand, and over in Australia, where the little penguins also live, they are called fairy penguins. So they're about 1 kilo and about 30 centimeters tall. So they're the smallest penguins out of the 18 odd species that exist, and they are only found here in New Zealand and Australia. They're classified as at risk declining, so there seems to be indicating a potential problem that we are hoping to address here in New Zealand. They live all over New Zealand, so North Island, South Island, Stewart Island, and there are offshore islands, and there are also some on the Chatham Islands. They are active at night, so they can return from fishing after dark, and they live in burrows along the coast. So their burrow nesting birds are quite almost invisible, because not only are they on land only at night, in the day they can be ashore, of course, when they're breeding, so incubating eggs or looking after chicks, or they're molting. So they are around all year and all over New Zealand. They don't migrate as such, so they don't go very far. They stay reasonably close to their colony, but they can travel large distances and even have been found as far away as Namibia on the west coast of Africa and in South America as well, so odd stragglers. In New Zealand, there have been a couple of cases where a banded penguin from Oamaru showed up in Kaikoura and started breeding there. And also a penguin that was marked here on the Otago Peninsula was found on the west coast of the South Island. So individuals can travel quite a long distance, but generally they stay in the general vicinity of where they were hatched. Little penguins lay 2 eggs and often raise 2 chicks. If that first clutch fails, they can also relay and try again in the same season. And the little penguins that live in Australia and in Otago can also lay a couple more eggs after they've fledged their chicks. So they can actually produce up to 4 chicks in a season. That gives them the title of the most productive seabird on the planet. No other seabird can produce up to 4 chicks in a season.
Small but mighty, eh? Comes to mind. For you guys personally, what's your favorite fact about Kororā that might surprise people?
So the Kororā are in a very elite group of animals that mate for fun. So a Kororā have been seen and also recorded on video to mate even while they're molting, or even while they've got chicks or eggs. When there is no reason, they don't need to, because they are not trying to fertilize eggs. And the elite group is humans, dolphins, and Kororā.
Oh, far out.
I didn't know that. That's amazing. What about you, Mel?
Well, Hiltrun's fact there really summarises that they like to keep themselves busy. And small but mighty for sure in many, many ways. But I think something that people don't realise about Kororā is just how far they are willing to travel on land to get to their perfect home. So often we will come across burrows and we cannot fathom why these penguins have chosen to live there, because they've had to climb a huge cliff, or they've had to travel more than 500 metres across some paddocks or something to get to where their home is on land. For something that is so small and has a pretty hard life, it's just really amazing the spots that they cherish as their burrows, and they're really well known for returning to the same spot years and years later. So they really like their homes, so it makes it really important to keep those homes safe for them. And another cute thing is that they like to cuddle.
Which ties into Hiltrun's point. They're such an interesting species, and I think it's hard to fathom what impact they have on you emotionally until you see them up close and personal. It's like there's such a large amount of personality packed into this small little animal. It's just so amazing. But do we have a current estimate on the Kororā population in Aotearoa, New Zealand? Do we know how many are actually here?
So worldwide, and that will include Australia and New Zealand, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, so the IUCN, the authority on the endangered species on this planet, reports from 2020 that we have 469,760 breeding adults. So they have classified it as least concern, but they also specify that the species is data deficient for numbers and for trends, and that 60% of sites where Kororā should be or are have unknown trends. So that means we don't know whether the numbers are going up or down. In New Zealand, the Department of Conservation has classified it as at risk declining, with 5 to 20,000 mature individuals. So that's the official numbers, but we really don't have better understanding where they are, how many there are, and the trends. And the data or these numbers rather, are based on some selected sites like Banks Peninsula, for example, Motunua Island near Christchurch, and Oamaru in North Otago. So although Matten and Wilson produced a paper suggesting we have 64,700 individuals, but not entirely sure what that is based for. So no, we don't really know how many there are. There are some numbers kicking about, and they seem to be looking pretty healthy, but they're based on historical data, so we don't have much in terms of what's up to date now.
Okay, that's really interesting. So how much can we rely on that data to determine the abundance of the population? From what I'm hearing, we have numbers, but we don't have enough to prove those numbers, and so I guess that's where NZPI fits in, right?
So the numbers are from selected areas. So there are some areas we know very precisely how many they have. Oamaru is a good example. We know exactly how many there are there and how they're doing, and the numbers are going up or down. But that's really more the exception than the rule. So Banks Peninsula and Pohatu, they collect very good data on the white-flipped penguins as well. But there aren't really many long-term studies for numbers and breeding success, survival, all those biological parameters that are important to understand a population is just not available.
Right. So as a non-data person, just so I understand these reported numbers correctly, would that be where we say, well, Pohatu, Banks Peninsula, Oamaru, they have this many penguins, so we can extrapolate that out to this is how much we expect nationwide or globally based on the areas we're monitoring? Or how does that actually turn into the numbers we report?
You can't extrapolate. Anecdotally, we do know that the penguins live in other areas in the Marlborough Sounds, in Golden Bay, Wellington, Taranaki, Hauraki Gulf. They're not precise numbers, so it's a matter of going out and counting burrows and going back and seeing how many are occupied, etc. So that data is just not available for many other places. So you can't extrapolate from the ones that are in a specific place. That would be assuming that, say, Timaru has the same number of penguins as Oamaru, or what you find in Wellington would apply to the Bay of Plenty, for example. It doesn't work like that.
So what I'm hearing is there's lots of bits and pieces of information, but nothing reliable for nationwide, which should be their range. I guess there's no historic data that we can compare today's standpoint to either, or is there?
There doesn't seem to be historical data available in the public sphere. I would not be surprised if there are a number of people out there that have got good data in notebooks and maybe on a computer, but it's not available to us. That's where it is. So it needs to be dug out, it needs to be looked at and analysed, and maybe if their study has finished, need to go back and see how many we've got now so that we can compare that to the data they collected maybe 20 or 30 years ago. that's the only way of doing it. If you want to know how many kororā live in New Zealand, go find them.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful statement that you made there, outlining what we don't know. But do we know what factors led to their suspected decline over the years?
Yes, so we do suspect there is a decline, but again, no data. We can't prove it. So again, the data is required before we can definitely say they're declining. DOC has acknowledged that they're declining. Their classification is as at risk declining, but we don't have numbers with it. So looking a little bit back over the last few decades, in the Hauraki Gulf, or in Northland in particular, they have reported mass mortalities of kororā in the mid-70s was a mass mortality of thousands of birds found dead, again in the mid-80s and again in the 90s. And there has not really been anything since then, no mass mortalities reported. So the question is, do they not happen? Are there no more mass mortalities, or are there just not enough penguins to show up in a mass mortality event? We don't know, because we need to find live penguins and see how many there are on the offshore islands as well as on the general coast of the country. I think that the penguin numbers have probably declined. We have a lot of people living on those coasts, so if there were lots of penguins dying, people would find it and people will report it either to DOC or to iNaturalist or an eBird, or go to the media, go, I have found 5,000 dead penguins, and it just doesn't seem to happen. It just doesn't seem to filter through the various media channels. Why they had those mass mortalities, we don't know. It's quite a long way in the past now. It is possible that it has to do with a collapse of their food source, but there is another example where we don't know what the penguins are eating. So diet studies have been done for Banks Peninsula, Oamaru, and on Stewart Island, Codfish Island, and that's it. We don't know any of their diet, so we don't really know what they're eating, say in the Hauraki Gulf. So is it dominated, say, by one species that is influenced by El Nino events, water temperatures, climate change, that sort of thing? So yes, it could have been a food collapse. That's what's happened in Australia, but we have no data, no evidence for that. Another reason why they're probably declining is that there's been in the past, we've heard horror stories of people telling us they knew this old geezer who as a young guy was working on the wool shed, and the penguins were under the wool shed, and it was his job to get them out of there and kill them because they were smelling up the place. So that's a pretty shocking attitude, and yes, that was a few decades ago, but it just goes to show the attitude of people at the time to a species that gets underfoot, if you like. They're under buildings, they're smelly, and they're active at night, so they're noisy. And it's still a problem. People have batches, and there are penguins underneath the batches, keeping them awake during the night. So they might block off the access to under the batches, and then the penguin wanders. The garden is exposed to the dog and the cat, and possibly cars on the road if they're lost and they can't find a safe place to go. So with the development on the coast, that is a potential problem for them. And if it happens often enough all over New Zealand, the penguins are losing their homes everywhere. There are ways around it. You can live with them. We need to accommodate them, and there are ways of doing that.
Yeah, so the suspected decline then is predators like cats and ferrets and dogs and domestic animals, persecution, and then urban development and building up infrastructure which removes their habitat. Are there any other key reasons why you suspect they're declining?
I think one of the problems that is possibly quite unacknowledged is kororā killed by people's dogs, and they don't necessarily get reported because that's not allowed. And there might be consequences. We don't really know how bad that problem is, but if you go onto a beach, there are people with dogs. and even at dusk or at dawn even, when the penguin's wanting to go to sea or they're coming home from fishing, they might encounter a dog, and the dog will find a penguin irresistible. They might not kill it straight away, but if a dog grabs the penguin and shakes it, they get brain damage. It takes them about 3 days to die. So it's quite horrendous, and it probably happens a lot more than we think. We are trying to gather information around that problem, and lobbying or talking to councils and say, well, you've got penguins here. We need to do something about the dogs because we're finding dead penguins. There are other things that are human-induced. Rubbish, for example, can hurt a penguin. So discarded fishing lines can entangle them. Then they'll starve to death. They might have not died from their injuries, but they're dying from not being able to go out to sea. You get other things like rubbish blocking burrows. There's potential oil spills, diesel spills if they're living near ports. They can be struck by boats. That can be lethal or sublethal injuries, so they need to then be found and rescued and rehabilitated. There'll be diseases out there that we know nothing about that are potentially be devastating for the penguins. With climate change, with getting warmer, there's a potential that some diseases will become more important in terms of their prevalence within the population. And if they're already stressed for other reasons, disturbance or food shortage, then they'll be more susceptible to diseases as well.
It's a cocktail of challenges for a species we know very little about. And when I started learning about Kororā, thanks Anna, thanks Mel, two of my main teachers in this space, I found it really fascinating that they are an ecosystem indicator and they live in that vector between the ocean and land, which is great for many reasons, but I understand that that presents challenges around gathering data when they're in these habitats. On a practical level, how do we actually go about gathering that data?
Yeah, so the Kororā straddle both worlds, on land and at sea. On land, they're relatively easy to find and monitor. It's a skill that you need to learn, but there are birds that walk. So it has to be within their walking distance, which can be surprisingly far, but it's still walking distance, which means that they leave behind a little path sometimes. Not always, but sometimes, that you can follow, and then you can find a burrow, and then you know that's where a pier or several piers live in that vicinity. They return there every year, so they don't disappear for months on end. They often return to their natal colony as well, so where they're hatched to breed once they're ready at 2 years old. At sea, it is much more difficult to monitor them, so they can be given a GPS logger, for example, that they glue onto the back of onto their backs, onto the feathers, and that gives you basically a squiggly line on a map where they got to fish. That can be quite useful if you're trying to argue that a particular part of the ocean should be protected from a certain type of fishing, or just overall as an argument for marine reserves. But it is always going to be limited to small numbers, because that gear is very expensive and satellite time costs a lot of money, and it's very labor intensive as well. So you can never do lots and lots, and it will be very tricky to understand, for example, group behavior at sea. Do they fish together? Do they talk to each other? And there's maybe some evidence for that, but in some years and in others it's not. So it's quite interesting, but definitely very challenging to find out what they're up to out at sea. So there are other ways of finding out more about them, that, for example, when we study the birds that are washed ashore dead, that we can find out what killed them. So they will give us some information about the issues that they might be facing at sea as well. And another way of understanding a little bit more about the use of the ocean by the penguins is studying their diet. And these days it's hands-off diet study. So you collect some scat, otherwise known as poo, and you can put it through a process where you find out what the DNA is in that poo and relate it to fish species. And that gives an insight into how the diet might change through the year. from the same place, or how it is different, say, in the Hauraki Gulf compared to in Otago, and also how it might change over longer periods of time with climate change. Are there different species of fish showing up because the oceans are warming? And that gives a good idea about what's happening. And you can almost do it anywhere at any time, because you don't actually have to touch a bird or do anything with it. All you have to collect is a bit of poo and put it in a little container and send it off, and you get an idea of what they've been eating. And that is definitely a huge hole in the knowledge of Kororā.
It's fascinating. Lots of little pieces to the big puzzle. So through collecting more and more data with the groups that you work with, have we identified any new key threats that Kororā face today or might be facing in the future, and a way to protect them from these threats?
Habitat loss is one of the biggest things that Kororā are facing, and part of that problem is coastal erosion and tidal inundation. So with the rising sea levels that are happening with climate change and more frequent storm events, their burrows are getting washed out with big king tides, and as the coastal erosion occurs, their burrows end up collapsing, effectively forcing Kororā to move further inland and up to high elevations. So it's really important when we're looking at our coastal spaces and coastal reserves, particularly for landowners, is that we're ensuring a future for Kororā to make sure that they can move further inland and then they can move up to higher elevations, and that will hopefully save a lot of our colonies. Warming sea temperatures, as Hiltrun already mentioned, can affect food availability, and over the past 5 years we have certainly seen in particular areas where they've been experiencing increased sea surface temperatures, where a number of Kororā wash ashore and they are starving, particularly juveniles or molting birds that are already quite vulnerable. They are showing up on the beach and there's almost nothing left to them. Temperature extremes on land as well has the potential to really harm Kororā. So again, particularly young birds or molting birds that might not be able to thermoregulate really well. If we suffer from extreme heats, that can pose a significant risk to them. And as Hiltrun also mentioned about diseases and parasites, it's just something that we really don't know much about in New Zealand, but we are starting to notice more and more birds with particular issues where they might need rescue and rehabilitation with treatment of such of those diseases. And how we can go about protecting our Kororā, there's a number of actions that we can take. A lot of them are actually really simple. So increasing coastal vegetation, undertaking planting days, and fencing off areas, so that allows the plants to thrive, which provides nice cover for the penguins. It stabilises the soil, and it also prevents people and their dogs accessing those areas. So people can often be trampling Kororā burrows underneath their feet without them even realising. So having those areas actually fenced off so that they go undisturbed means that Kororā can continue to breed and molt safely in their burrows without the impact of humans and dogs visiting those spaces. Predator control is a key factor, as with many species. There's no point doing all this work when they're just going to be eaten by things. So getting traps in reserve spaces as much as possible, and also extending that network to people in their backyards, is really important to reduce the predation pressure on them. Dogs and cats, obviously keeping them away. Cats ideally should be kept in at night, but ideally contained within their homeowner's property so that they're not harming our wildlife. Undertaking cleanups to remove some of the rubbish that ends up along the beach, and having fast responses to our marine oil spills that do happen. With more and more boating activities on the water, more and more ports, is really important that, particularly in areas where we know where Kororā are, that if there is a spill that occurs, that a local penguin group is notified so they can go out and check on their penguins and make sure that none of them have been affected by that spill. Responsible fishing, so reducing our overall fishing industry would be great to reduce pressure on the food available, but also just making sure that recreational fishing fishers are making sure they take any discarded fishing line away with them, not leaving bait bags lying around, vehicles off beaches. So because Kororā obviously access land to get to their burrows and they walk across beaches, areas where motor vehicles, four-wheel drives, motorbikes are allowed, that poses a huge risk to them, particularly at night time when they're coming home to their burrows, or early in the morning when they're heading back out to sea. And we have seen quite a few birds that have been struck by vehicles, so not only on the beaches but also on our roads where they're in coastal areas. Trying to be really mindful of having safe pathways for them so that they can get home to their burrows and back out to sea is really important.
Totally agree. Some of them are fairly simple actions, and I guess it's about being mindful that Kororā might be present being at the beach. And thinking to that, what's the wider response been of the community to Kororā conservation over the years, and how do people get involved these days?
So the general awareness for Kororā is growing across the country from both public and community conservation groups, which is amazing for them. And more people are realising that penguins are also present on their private properties, whether that be in a residential area that's near the beach or rural properties. And we have many where we have heard penguins have been nesting on their property for years, or people that might have just recently taken over ownership over property and they hear something noisy underneath their house and say, hey, I've got these penguins making an incredible racket underneath my house. I'd really like to get some sleep, but I'm not too sure how to help them. And so that is growing, and it's becoming more and more of a demand in the penguin conservation realm. And anyone that is interested in penguins and wanting to keep them safe, they can check out their local area to see if there's already a penguin conservation group doing some work for Kororā in their area, and there is many across the country, so I strongly advise that people can get in touch with their local groups as a first point of contact. And anyone interested in undertaking protection for Kororā that may be in their local area and there's no one else doing anything, or they just want to learn more, they can get in touch with us and we can help support their journey in looking after penguins in their backyard. And I think a big thing to remember is that penguin conservation requires many skills, and passion being the number one thing, passion and commitment. So penguins are a long-term commitment because it takes so long to learn about them. So I've been working with Kororā for over a decade, and every day I'm still learning something new about them and something that surprises me. So it's amazing that we're getting more and more information about them, and they really are a species that just do what they want when they want, which adds to their character and why we love them so much, I think. So don't be shy.
And NZPI plays a really key role in helping. So how does NZPI support the community groups who are stepping up and taking a role in this space?
We provide general support and advice, just in terms of educating people around Kororā, anything to do with their biology, their behaviour, their habitat. But a big part of what we do is facilitate the national monitoring program, and so we train people that want to undertake penguin conservation, can train them on how to monitor them safely while also reducing disturbance and also mitigate any of the local threats that they may have, and that largely comes through habitat management. Education and advocacy, so how to educate the public about the kororā that they have living there, and also advocating for threats that may be a bigger issue than what that local group can potentially deal with. So working with stakeholders such as DOC and councils to help pursue bigger problems that are going to protect penguins on a large scale.
That sounds fantastic. I think nationwide Kororā action is really what's needed by the sounds of it to close those gaps. So how does this collaborative approach strengthen Kororā conservation efforts?
Well, everybody shares their knowledge and they share their resources, which makes conservation for Kororā much more achievable and sustainable. It also makes it really more inspiring for other people because they are there to support each other. You know that you're not on this journey alone and that other people are going through the similar issues to you. Your penguins are potentially facing similar issues, and by sharing the expertise around the country, it means that we're achieving conservation at probably a much faster pace than what we would have if we were to go about it alone. And I think that's really important. And one of the biggest new things that NZPI has started doing is hosting an online monthly support meeting. So once a month we open up a meeting, and that's a chance for anyone interested in penguin conservation to talk about their local colony, compare with other people what's happening around the country, and provide tips and advice. Could be something practical, or just share frustrations. And every single meeting that we have, we learn something new, and everybody walks away mind blown about how amazing Kororā are yet again, but also that they feel connected with each other. And many of them actually go on outside of the meeting to get in touch with each other and hopefully support each other's projects, which is what we want to see, collaboration across the country.
Yeah, right. Collaboration is key. Yeah, there's no lone heroes in this space. We can't do it unless we do it together. And I think that's indicative of the wider conservation space. What are the key knowledge gaps that we want to fill in the upcoming years? What is going to make a difference if we know it?
The number of penguins. That's the biggest gap in our knowledge. We don't know how many there are. And unless we do that, we can't argue that they need better protection. We can't argue with stock that they need to be reclassified, for example. And we also need trends over time. So if we can show that the penguin numbers are declining, or that their colonies are going extinct left, right and centre because the penguins have been chased away or killed on roads or for development. So we need the hard data. We also need the distribution of the penguins. So not just how many there are, but there are so many unknowns along the coast of New Zealand. New Zealand has a lot of coast. And yes, that is a very tall order, but there are areas where we don't even know whether there are penguins there, never mind how they're doing or how many. Are they producing any chicks? Are the chicks recruiting into the breeding population? And so on. What's their survival like? We have so little data. It keeps coming back to the problem identified in 2019 when NZPI started, is that we don't know enough. We need to know more. If we know more, then we can start lobbying the government for better protection, for better care of this taonga species. At the moment, unfortunately, we get told again and again by DOC staff, they're fine. There are lots of them. They're fine. I'm like, how do you know? What's your numbers? Show me your numbers. And they go, they're fine. And that to me is head in the sand stuff. You need to have better information, better data. You also need to know more about what is threatening them, detailing the threats that the penguins are exposed to on land and in the ocean. And that in conjunction then with the data of the numbers and how they're doing will give us an idea of the overall situation and what we can do, what we need to do. Because the last thing we want to see is Kororā disappearing from parts of New Zealand. I think that would be just heartbreaking. We're losing species around the planet at an unparalleled pace, and it's because of human activity. We can do better, but we need the numbers.
100%, and I can just hear that there's just a lack of data that we need to try and fix, and it sounds like we're underway, but based on our current knowledge levels, what's your outlook for the future of Kororā in New Zealand?
I have to admit I'm worried. I'm worried about Kororā. I think that there are a lot fewer there than we believe there are, that they don't exist on stretches of the coast where there used to be lots. That's not good. That's not good. They'll fade away, and the coastline without Kororā will spread, and that's not good enough. We need to do better as humans. We need to document what is threatening them and then advocate for changes. We need to change things. And it starts with an attitude. It starts with caring and treasuring kororā so that they can be safe, so we can share the space on the coast and in the ocean with them and ensure that they not disappear and that future generations will still be able to say, we have penguins in our backyard, we have penguins here and there, and they're part of our world, they're part of where we live. It's not too late. I think there are still quite a lot around, but we don't want to wait for them to become as rare as hoiho or takahe or kakapo, and then we swing into actions and we're panicking. I think we need to avoid being the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, but put the fence up at the top of the cliff before it gets too bad and they fade away like some other species are doing right now.
Yeah. What about you, Mel?
Yeah, I'm quite scared, to be honest, based on my role and being able to visit kororā colonies around the country. Once you piece it together, it's really sad to see what's happening in every area, and every area has its own set of problems that they are facing. And I know from my previous background that it really doesn't take much to help them. So why are we not doing more? What is preventing us from being able to help them? There's so many issues that we are already aware of and we already know how to fix it, but it's not been solved. So it's a matter of changing perspective and attitude and making sure that we can put them first. So we're really lucky in that kororā are one of the few of our native species that actually seem to live amongst humans really, really well. But we actually need to give them the safe space to be able to do that.
And I think that goes hand in hand with awareness of people actually discovering and acknowledging that, yes, I do have penguins near me, so therefore those and those are the actions that I should take right now. And saying that, if we zoom out a little bit, what kind of ripple effects do we start to see across the board once we acknowledge that they're there and once we start protecting them in an area?
When a group of people decide that they want to be working with kororā in their area, they often become aware of other species as well. So they might start out by trapping, and that of course benefits kororā, but it'll benefit other species as well. So your biodiversity will go up. That's often an entry point for our groups, is that they've been doing trapping in an area because they see a necessity for it for other species. Then they become the guardians for an area. They delighted that, oh, we've got penguins. I mean, who doesn't like penguins? So they get enthusiastic and they get schools involved, and then the kids might create a sign saying, kororā are living here, put your dog on a lead. And we have found that the groups report back that school group signs are more effective than DOC signs or DCC signs. And if a child tells you off for having your dog off the lead, I think it's a lot more effective than when a DOC officer comes and swings the big stick and says, you shall not. And they go, nah, I'm not listening to you. But a 12-year-old goes, did you know? And you should. And that's dangerous. That seems to work. So involving the kids and the community is beneficial, has a ripple effect, not just for kororā, but for other species that use the foreshore, that use the beaches and the general area there. And often people are actually very surprised to know that they've got penguins on their coastline, and they're delighted. They're absolutely delighted. That goes a long way. If you love something, then you want it to thrive and you want to protect it and help with that. Overall, knowing more about penguins that live in both worlds, on land as well as at sea, they can teach us a lot about the state of the ocean, for example, as well. They can be flagship species for lesser known or maybe less charismatic or lovable species, like, for example, the grey-faced petrel or oi, is probably quite elusive. Most people of the general public probably don't know what it is or where it is or why it is important. Why should we care? but you tell somebody that it's important to care for a penguin, for some reason that is just so much easier. People love penguins, generally speaking. I don't think there are a lot of humans on the planet that go, penguins, nah. Penguins, yeah, oh, cute.
Penguins are like a gateway into activating people for coastal conservation, for biodiversity. I love it. If you could wave a magic wand and you could have any outcome for NZPI 10 years, what would that look like?
For me, it would look like that all penguins in New Zealand are safe. That they are not threatened by all these things we've talked about. That they can come and go and they're safe on land as well as in the ocean. We have good data. We have information about how many there are, where they all live, and how they're going into the future. Like breeding success and recruitment, survival, those sort of things are all known, and we can see if there is a problem and we can identify what we can do to help with a particular issue, be it food shortage or warming waters or whatever. Everything comes through a centralized space so that it's not bits and pieces of information and data floating around in the ether, in the people's notebooks all over the country, in their attic. But we know we have the information and that we know about the species and we can keep it safe effectively. And DOC is on board and the councils are on board and the general public is on board.
For me, I would like to see an extensive network of community groups all across the country. We know that if penguins have a group of dedicated people looking out for them in their area, that they've got a high chance of being okay. So the ultimate goal is to see penguins thriving, and that generally takes people managing those populations. So the more people that we have that are standing up for them, the better.
100%. You need these coastal guardians to give the penguins a voice, because they're not going to communicate in a way that most people will understand by themselves. So if someone listening to this podcast finds a kororā injured or dead on their beach in their backyard, what should they do?
First of all, we should establish that to see a kororā on the beach during the day is not normal. So that's the first thing that people should be aware of. There's generally something wrong with a kororā if you are finding it walk onto a beach or wash ashore in the waves and it's the middle of the day in the bright sun. There's a reason why we don't generally see them during the day, and that's because they normally come ashore at night time. So that's the first indication that they are sick or injured. And the first point of contact should be your local wildlife rescue rehab organisation, or if you have a local penguin group, there's a high chance that they are also involved with rescue, or they have a point of contact that that bird could be taken to be assessed. And you should also notify 0800 DOC HOT, so there is a record of that penguin needing help. And if there is any suspicion that the bird may have been, say, struck by a vehicle or attacked by a dog, people should also notify their local council immediately, because that dog could be posing risks to other kororā that are in the area. So it's really important. Ideally, we need records of the date, the time, some photos of the bird, because that can help inform us of what might have happened. For any dead kororā, we recommend people upload a record to iNaturalist, so they can take a photo and record the date, time, location of where that bird has been found. And they should also let their local penguin group know, because a lot of kororā are marked. They may either have a flipper band or they may have a microchip, and the local group will want to know about it, because that helps inform some of our research that has gone on around the country.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really, really important, that you notify the right people in that space and not just walk past it and hope for someone else to notice it as well. And then also, for our listeners, what's the key thing that you would like everyone to know or do for kororā conservation?
I think the first thing we need to do is respect their space. So if we can respect penguins and their right to exist and their right to live, then that's the first step in terms of making sure that their populations are going to thrive. You can get involved with supporting your local conservation efforts, either with a penguin group or any other coastal organisations that might be protecting habitat in some way. You can be a responsible pet owner, so if there's a dog bylaw zone, don't take your dog there. There's a clear reason why that has been set in place. And keeping dogs on leashes at beaches, keeping your cats in at night. Those are some really key things that can really go a long way to helping Kororā. Picking up any rubbish while you're out visiting beaches can literally save a penguin's life. And yeah, ideally put some traps in your backyard, because it helps reduce the overall predation pressure that feeds into our reserves where lots of our penguins are living.
Some good tips there. Question for both of you, Mel and Hiltrun. What does conservation mean to you?
Well, for me, it means that us as humans, we live with nature, and we don't fight it. We accommodate it. We live amongst nature and share the planet, and that we also undo some of the damage that we've done. We've done a lot of damage to this planet, and I think we have a personal responsibility as a human, as a citizen of this planet, to undo some of that and leave it a little better, at least in your patch, than how you found it. And so I think the tragedy of losing a species to extinction cannot be overestimated. I think we all lose out when a species goes extinct. Any species, animals, plants, fungi, anything goes extinct, that's gone forever. If humanity caused that, I think it's extra tragic. And I think we need to do better. We need to not fight nature, but work with nature.
Absolutely. And you, Mel?
Very similar to Hiltrun, about valuing nature and ultimately just giving species a chance to exist, both now and in the future.
I second everything that both of you just said. I think that is a crucial piece to the puzzle and of just being a bit better and stepping up. So if people are inspired by Kororā conservation and your mahi, your work, what we just talked about, how can they support your work and how can they get involved?
Well, our main concern is that we don't know enough. We need to know more. So if you know about penguins in your patch of paradise, get in touch. If you care about penguins and about the natural world and would like to know how to help them, what you could do to contribute, to safeguard them, to ensure that they have a safe place to be, at least on land, then we can support you. Let us know how we can help you. There are lots of ideas on our website as well, so have a look around there and get in touch, talk to us. There are lots of people who love penguins and lots of people that want to talk to other people that love penguins. And we're amongst them, and we want to talk to anybody who's interested and wants to help them.
Thank you. That's a really good call to action here, and I can second that there's some amazing resources on the NZPI website, which is a really, really good starting point for everyone. I just really want to thank both of you, Hiltrun and Melissa, for coming on today and chatting Kororā conservation with us. I think everyone loves penguins, and if we can get the word out there on how to respect them, how to help them and protect them, then this is going to be a better world that we live in for sure. So thank you both so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I just want to second that to all of you, really. The penguin conservation and penguins in general quite often fly under the radar. And like you say, data deficiency creates lack of awareness, creates lack of action. So good on you. I just think it's amazing that we need more people like you.
Thank you. Could I just give a quick shout out to all the groups that are signed on with NZPI and also the external groups that are out there looking after penguins. Without them doing the hard mahi on the ground, we wouldn't be able to achieve what we're working towards with this national project. So thank you.
And acknowledgements to our funders as well, who thought of and created NZPI. We're privately funded, so it's a great vision, and we want to acknowledge our funders that they make this possible and help penguins.
So are we, and I'm sure all of the groups that you look out for. I think we're back at collaboration, so thank you again.
And if you are volunteering with penguins or you're funding penguin conservation and you're listening to this right now, I think you just deserve a pat on the back. So.
Thank you very much.